Chapter 1. Spark of Brilliance. The air hummed with possibility. It was 1969, and the world stood on the brink of something extraordinary, not just in the skies above, where rockets roared toward the moon, but in the quiet laboratories and lecture halls where minds like no other were writing the laws of the universe. The walls of academia had long been built to keep certain voices out, but the genius of these pioneers was too bright to ignore. Their ideas, once dismissed, now crackled with the energy of 1,000 stars, ready to ignite a revolution. In a dimly lit office at Howard University, a young physicist named James M.B. Jackson adjusted his glasses, his fingers tracing the edges of a chalkboard covered in equations. The symbols danced before him, not as static marks, but as living things of a cosmic tapestry he was determined to unravel. Around him, the rhythmic tap of a typewriter and the distant murmur of students filled the air, but his focus was elsewhere. Somewhere beyond the visible spectrum, in the quantum realm where particles defied logic, he saw a truth waiting to be discovered. Across the country, in a laboratory bathed in the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, another mind was at work. Ernest Everett, just though long gone, had left behind a legacy that refused to fade. His notes, his theories, his relentless pursuit of understanding had become a beacon for those who followed. And now, in the hands of a new generation, his work was being pushed further into territories even he might have hesitated to explore. The world outside these halls was changing. The civil rights movement had shattered barriers, but the halls of science remained, a fortress of tradition. Yet in the quiet defiance of these scholars, something new was taking shape. They were not just breaking rules, they were rewriting them. At the heart of it all was a question. What if the universe was not as rigid as it seemed? What if the very fabric of reality was woven with threads of possibility, waiting for the right mind to pull them apart and see the pattern beneath? The answer would come from an unexpected place. In a small apartment in Chicago, a young woman named Shirley Ann Jackson sat hunched over the desk, her fingers flying across a calculator. The numbers were her language, her way of speaking to a world that often refused to listen. Around her, the city pulsed with life, trains rattling, horns blaring, laughter spilling from open windows, but she was lost in a different kind of rhythm, the rhythm of discovery. Her work on theoretical physics was not just about equations, it was about vision. She saw connections where others saw chaos. She understood that the smallest particles held the key to the largest mysteries, and though the world around her was slow to recognize it, her brilliance was undeniable. Meanwhile, in a lecture hall at Met, a man named John Hope Franklin stood before a room full of skeptical faces. His voice was steady, his words precise. He spoke of quantum mechanics, of the strange behavior of particles that seemed to exist in multiple states at once. The students leaned forward, their skepticism giving way to fascination. This was not just theory, this was a new way of seeing. And then there was the quiet genius of Percy Julian, whose work in chemistry had already reshaped medicine. His discoveries in synthetic compounds had saved countless lives. But his true legacy was in the minds he inspired. He had proven that brilliance knew no boundaries, that the pursuit of knowledge was a right, not a privilege. As the decades rolled on, these pioneers and those who followed in their footsteps pushed further. They dared to ask questions that others deemed impossible. They challenged the very foundations of what was known, and in doing so, they reshaped the future. The spark of brilliance had been lit, and it would not be extinguished. The world was changing, and science was leading the way. The discoveries of these black geniuses were not just adding to the sum of human knowledge, they were redefining it. They were proving that the universe was far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more accessible than anyone had ever imagined. And as the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the legacy of these pioneers grew stronger. Their work was no longer a whisper in the margins, it was a roar at the center of the scientific revolution. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next chapter would reveal how these sparks of brilliance ignited, a fire that would burn across generations, reshaping not just science, but the very way we understood our place in the cosmos. But for now, in the quiet of a laboratory, of a lecture hall, in the steady rhythm of a mind at work, something extraordinary was happening. The future was being written, and it was written in the language of genius.